Welcome to the channel. Judgment. When we lack the capacity to direct our life experience as we please and consequently rely on being seen as specific concepts to attain short-lived fulfillment, we mainly judge in two ways, with both propagating the mechanism that is the self-created identity. As such, by practicing non-judgment, we begin breaking our identification with specific concepts. The negative associations begin to dissipate. The more we tend to judge, the more our life experience becomes intertwined with the self-created identity. Note, there is indeed a time and place for judging, when this has to do with our purpose or a goal we have established. Unfortunately, most of the judgments we cast are for the purpose of obtaining a momentary feeling of fulfillment via the mechanism that is the self-created identity. These judgments come with dire consequences we are not aware of due to our ignorance regarding the workings of the mechanism that is the self-created identity. The two manners in which we judge are the following. 1. Reactionary. This type of judgment is what takes place when we recognize somebody as a specific concept. This recognition, the judgment, is actually the result of an unconscious comparison we make between us and that particular individual, in which we find them to be more of a specific concept tied to our self-created identity than ourselves. Recall our earlier discussion. The thing here is to catch ourselves and consciously stop the judgment. We must also keep ourselves from reacting via our thoughts and feelings. The more we are aware, the less these reactionary judgments will take place. If we stop these judgments, eventually the importance we place on being seen as the specific concept will diminish, and these reactionary judgments will consequently diminish as well. 2. Consciously. These are the judgments we establish in order to feel temporary fulfillment by making ourselves and others, if this is done publicly rather than in our head, see ourselves as more of a concept than the target of our judgment. Of course, the dual effect of the judgment is something we are mostly unaware of. Just as how in our reactionary judgments we feel less of the concept due to seeing the other person as more of the concept, when we judge someone to be less of a concept, we are the ones who feel as if we are more of that concept. The judgment is a comparison in which, if we do not specify who the person is less than, it is us. However, when we judge someone, we don't do it by stating that they are less of the concept tied to our self-created identity than us. We judge them using an apparently completely different concept. Thus the question arises, how does our judging them as a different concept make us feel more of the concept that is tied to our self-created identity? For example, if one of the concepts tied to our self-created identity via a negative association, comprised of I and the concept, is good, we don't necessarily judge others as less good, we judge them as bad, which is a completely separate concept. Right? Wrong. Bad is actually less good. The dynamic of opposites. Instead of seeing people as less of a concept linked to our self-created identity, we see them as the opposite of said concept. Why would we see people as the opposite rather than simply less of the concept? Because we cannot see them as less. What would they be less of in comparison to? We are not aware that what we are essentially doing when we judge is establishing a comparison. Thus, it would make no sense for us to say that a person is less of anything, since we do not see that we are comparing them to ourselves. Consciously, this would not compute. The way our mind works around this is by using the opposite term. The reason why judging others as the opposite term of the concept we wish to be seen as makes us feel more of this concept can be understood by placing what we take as opposites on a measurement scale. In this manner, we can see that what we believe to be opposites under certain circumstances can actually be understood to be degrees of the same thing in other circumstances. Note: remember, we cannot understand the way things are. Conceptualizations and structures can be manipulated to help us better thrive and exist in the conceivable universe. It is not that opposites are actually one thing or that they are two things. This is simply the way the conceptualizations, which are thoughts created by humans, are being manipulated in order to help us propagate our purpose, which in the case of this book is to obtain the capacity to direct our life experience as we please. When we explain things, there must be a purpose for our explanation. Without this, we are simply thinking for the sake of thinking. When we place bad and good on a measurement scale, with bad being on the left extreme and good on the right extreme, we can correctly claim that our scale measures the goodness of a person. The opposites in this case are just the extremes, which help us to understand what the scale is measuring. Following, when we say that someone is bad and this is the context of a comparison, which it is every time we judge, we are essentially simply saying that the person is less good than us. If we are comparing two individuals in regard to how good they are, we can say that one of the individuals is less good than the other, but we can also say that one individual is good and that the other is bad. This second conclusion also informs us of the standing each individual holds to one another in regard to the concept of good. We know that one individual is more good than the other. The manner in how we address these conscious judgments we make is simply to stop. This might sound a bit pedantic, but once we understand why we are making these judgments and the damage we are causing ourselves via our behavior, we will indeed at least think twice before judging. 2. The associations that form our understanding pertaining to the concept. The second way in which we will begin dismantling the self-created identity is by simply practicing non-reaction. Specifically by practicing non-reaction when we experience not being the concept indirectly due to experiencing not meeting one of the criteria, associations that form our understanding pertaining to this concept. Recall our example of having a nice car is cool. Since our friend made a negative comment about our car, this means we no longer met the criteria, according to this association of being cool. The way we practice non-reaction is by controlling our feelings and thoughts, even though due to our established associations, we will be prone to react by getting upset. This places us in the state of dissatisfaction and further propagates the mechanism that is the self-created identity. The aim here is not to stop thinking that nice cars are cool. The aim is simply to not react to these associations and in the meantime break the negative associations, which is what makes us take everything personally. We are not attempting to become robots with no opinions. The goal is simply to unhinge these opinions from being linked to the mechanism that is the self-created identity. Concerns over letting go of our self-created identity. Concern 1. What will be our new purpose? If we stop aiming to represent certain concepts, such as successful, hardworking, kind, attractive, etc., how will we advance in life? How will we get ahead? How will we become what we want to be? Are we not supposed to conceptualize the type of person we wish to be? These are all concerns based on the negative emotion of fear. Remember, do not think when in a negative emotion. What is left for us to do is simply stop wanting to be seen as specific concepts and begin taking actions toward achieving our goals. We no longer will aim to get our fulfillment from being seen as specific concepts, but rather by directing our life experience in accordance with our will. Once we have separated from the self-created identity, the possibilities for what our purpose can now be are unlimited. This might be a bit overwhelming initially, but ultimately we will figure out our path. We should not let the negative emotions of doubt and fear direct our experience. With our newly gained freedom comes more responsibility. We must set goals. What we will become will be dictated by our actions and will always elude our conscious mind. Concern 2. Should we not at least aim to be good? Performing actions we deem to be good has nothing to do with wanting to be seen as good. The problem comes when we are performing actions for the purpose of being seen as good, either by ourselves or others. Aiming to be good is a trap that places us in the grip of the self-created identity. Aiming to be good and doing good are two very different things. Note, we must keep in mind when doing good to not place conceptualized structures over individuals and to respect the individual's autonomy. Unwelcomed good deeds are nothing more than self-serving advances. We ought to nourish individuals' capacities to direct their life experience according to their will, not our own, which rather than uplifting the individual, submits them. Instead of aiming to be good and thus propagating the self-created identity, let us work toward the goal we should all have in regard to being part of a community. Our goals should not only concern us as individuals, but also the society of which we are part of. A thriving society creates a thriving individual and vice versa. Thus, some of our goals, just as we have individual goals, ought to be to advance our community or society. By establishing set goals and following through, we can have a positive impact without worrying about being good or being seen as good. The caveat here is that this does take planning and action on our behalf, just as any goal we set for ourselves does. Setting these types of goals will quiet our need to be seen as good. Nevertheless, at the end of the day, we by no means have to do anything for society directly if we do not wish to. Simply the act of undergoing this process ourselves and letting go of our self-created identity will apport all on its own to our surroundings. There is no obligation for us to do anything or behave in any manner. By gaining the capacity to direct our life experience as we please, we are doing more than enough for society. The process of gaining the capacity to direct our life experience makes us civil as an unintended consequence. Think about it. We have to exit the negative cycle in order to go into the positive cycle if we are to gain the capacity. There is no way around this. We leave behind all our negative emotions, all our self-centered narratives, the self-created identity, and we generate the positive state of gratitude. We desist from actions and behaviors that bring about selfishness and negative emotions. Our entire outlook on the world shifts from the self-centered narrative of the self-created identity to that of an individual who does not view everyone and everything as either an opportunity or a threat. What serves the individual serves society. This is how we are all interconnected. The individual cannot gain the capacity to direct their life experience and leave behind the themes of suffering and dissatisfaction without simultaneously becoming a functioning member of society as an indirect consequence. If this is not intelligent design, what is? Awareness tip. We must be aware of the content we expose ourselves to, which inflates our self-created identity. We can and we ought to use content to inspire positive emotions and thoughts within us, but not to make us feel fulfilled by inflating our self-created identity, making us see ourselves as a specific concept, ridding ourselves of the self-created identity, something that will inevitably happen. As we are consciously dismantling our self-created identity, it will be as if we are having withdrawals from extremely heavy substance abuse that took place for however many years we have been alive for. We will find ourselves feeling low and maybe even a bit depressed. However, we must fight the urge to rely on being seen as specific concepts in order to make ourselves feel better. This will not be an easy task, as we are essentially having to override the manner in which we have been operating for our entire life thus far. The self-created identity brought us much of our fulfillment, and now we will be willingly giving this up, which is completely counterintuitive. The stronger the reliance on the self-created identity, the more we will potentially hurt on our path to getting rid of it. We must cut our addiction to the feeling of fulfillment, for we will not start experiencing this again until we have really earned it through gaining the capacity to direct our life experience. This is what makes the process very trying and difficult. Things will feel like they are getting worse before they start getting better. We must not guide ourselves based on how we feel. We must be disciplined and keep our goal in sight. Throughout our struggle, we must keep in mind why this is happening and that this is something that is absolutely necessary for us to do if we are to attain the ultimate goal. If we are aware of what is going on and we understand our feelings, we can move through it and make it to the other side. Author's note. At this point, read the insight, the argument for religion, something we must avoid at all costs. Although the process will be very difficult and we will naturally feel down at times, there is something we must be extremely careful of. If we lack the understanding pertaining to the reason why we are feeling the way we do, we can begin forming narratives and stories which will justify why we are feeling so down, and even feel threatened at times. These narratives can quite easily gain momentum and begin taking over our life experience, driving us into states of paranoia and potentially causing irreversible damage to our mind. The importance of knowing why we are suddenly feeling anxious, depressed, and down is invaluable. If we know what is going on with us, our mind will not wander while trying to find answers as to why we are suddenly feeling all these terrible things constantly. Otherwise, the only plausible solution we will come up with is that something or someone is doing this to us. If we lack the understanding that allows us to make the connection between what we are feeling and the truth that this is due to our own action of dismantling the self-created identity, we will look for something external to blame. Understanding why we feel threatened. Just as we can feel threatened by someone, 1. When the mechanism that is the self-created identity is activated reactively, either when we see someone as more of a concept than us, or when someone challenges our standing as a specific concept, we can also feel threatened when 2. We are dismantling our self-created identity. In both cases, this feeling of being threatened comes from lack of understanding pertaining what is causing us to undergo certain negative experiences. A lack of understanding regarding how the mechanism that is the self-created identity functions. In the cases in which the mechanism that is the self-created identity is activated reactively, we can come to feel a sense of being threatened by the individuals who we take as being the cause for our negative experiences. This comes about since our self-created identity is indeed what we identify with, and when this is put into question, we can erroneously interpret this as a threat/attack on our very person. This is part of the negative experiences we can potentially have due to the self-created identity. In these cases, we have someone we can blame for feeling threatened. Now, the really interesting and dangerous part comes in the cases in which we are dismantling the self-created identity ourselves. If we are not aware of how the mechanism that is the self-created identity works, we can potentially experience the same threat as in the other cases, a direct threat to our very person. The difference here, and what makes the situation potentially extremely dangerous, is that we do not have someone to blame for the negative experiences of feeling threatened. If we are not aware that this is happening due to the actions we ourselves are taking concerning dismantling the self-created identity, we can begin to form some very twisted and far-fetched narratives that will make us experience paranoia and potentially worse things. These narratives are what must be avoided at all costs. Without awareness of what is going on, we will begin attributing this feeling of being threatened to people around us, even to our family, and we will sow seeds of mistrust that can potentially ruin our most treasured relationships. Our mind will begin forming narratives as to why we are feeling threatened, which will bring on the state of paranoia. It is a horrible experience that can take away our humanity if we do not tread cautiously. The narrative as to what is threatening us will constantly change, and we will always think we have finally figured it out. We will constantly feel under attack and will not understand why. One can appreciate how this can have a tremendous detrimental effect on the psyche, which can snowball rather quickly. If we allow these thoughts to begin forming associations, meaning we have negative emotions while thinking these, we can develop what is referred to as neurosis/psychosis. Author's note. At this time, go ahead and read the insight, Psychosis and Neurosis. Note. We must stay ever present to control our emotions and our thoughts. During this process of ridding ourselves of the self-created identity, meditation helps to stabilize the mind and to take us out of any narrative we might have begun to build. The key at this stage is to let our thoughts, the explanations, pass through us without attaching to them. Sometimes it even helps to temporarily isolate if the urge to blame those around us is very strong. In this manner, we can avoid damaging our most treasured relationships. Note, if we recall, in Chapter 3.1, Separating Thoughts from Emotions, it is mentioned that we will come to learn the source of our negative emotions that seemingly come up out of nowhere. The self-created identity is the source of this. When it is in any way challenged via interactions with our environment and/or when we are directly attacking it ourselves, attempting to dismantle it, this will cause us to have negative experiences. Every human must at one point or another go through this process. The longer we wait, the more difficult it will be when the process eventually takes place. We might have begun reading this book with a much lighter intention in our hearts, but this is non-negotiable. There will be many people to help us through our process, as many more people than we are aware of have already gone through this process themselves. There are countless people in the world with open hearts. We just cannot see this, for our heart is closed off. There is indeed a sisterhood/brotherhood of humanity, and they are here for us in our hour of need. Download the complete book in order to follow along from the website. The link is in both the video and the channel description. Thank you so much.